Go run a really small company first and learn the finance part of running a small company.
What are the most important things student entrepreneurs should learn?
They kind of stall their own growth by doing too many products.
Welcome to another episode of the Tech Transfer Podcast. I'm Dave Brown. I'm here with Jason Huntsman, who teaches here at BYU and has done many product-based businesses. So Jason, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what makes a product-based business different?
Jason Huntsman. So I originally did my MBA and undergrad in engineering at BYU a long time ago.
Yeah.
And also was involved in a tech transfer business.
Which one was that?
That was Zero Max Sciences with Chris
sure.
Bryan. I think you've had Chris Bryan on the podcast
of course.
time too.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know you were working with Chris.
Yeah, and John Ward was also a part of that. So
Okay.
we did that as well as MBA students. So
Terrific.
all the way back to the tech transfer. I did end up working in strategy at Ford and doing a lot of investing and strategy work around electric vehicles.
Okay.
And then worked for Harley-Davidson for a number of years in their strategy group, doing electric vehicles again and some other businesses as well. Eventually, I spun out a business from Harley-Davidson that was Serial One Cycle Company and ran that for a number of years. That was sold last year. And now I'm doing a few different things, including consulting and doing advisory work with Canyon 14 Partners.
Okay, well, super interesting. So a few questions. Yeah, you teach strategy here. You've worked in these strategy positions. If you're in a company working in a strategy role, what is the day-to-day? What does the project look like?
Typically, you have major projects that you're typically working on, major initiatives, usually involved with growth initiatives. At least in my part, I've been involved with analytics a lot and figuring that out from a strategy standpoint, as well as launching new businesses and new products. And that typically is, kind of more of a long, drawn-out strategic process of kind of choosing what initiatives you're going to do and then trying to go and execute those as well.
Great. And so you've, with the bike company, this was e-bikes, right?
Correct.
And with the other companies you've worked for, these are all product-led companies. So how is that different? What is the alternative? Is that as opposed to a service-led company or
service or software? I've always gravitated towards product companies because that's just my background. That's kind of what I've always been in. And typically, they're a little bit harder to scale than a software company or operate than a service company because, a lot of times there's manufacturing involved, sometimes contract manufacturing, and then trying to get a product from sort of that idea stage to an MVP is a lot different than saying doing a software or an app.
Okay, and that's probably because iteration is slower, and then you have supply chain issues.
You've got to get supply chain up and running. You've usually got to get a lot, I would say, deeper customer feedback on a physical product versus something like software. If
you're a student entrepreneur starting a physical product company, maybe you've invented something, you're in Student Innovator of the Year or whatever, what is a good way to validate that?
So I'll answer that in two ways. I think one is a lot of students ask, I've got an invention or a product and I want to start a company with it. The first thing I always tell them is, hey, go run a really small company first and learn the finance part of running a small company. Because a lot of times, you'll start a company and you're really good at the product side, but you may need to bring in a partner or you should really learn a lot of the finance part too. So things I recommend to students are, go work with someone who runs a vending machine company. Very, very small. You can learn cash flow, inventory, all the things that you're going to have to deal with in a much larger company that's product-led. And so that's one. But then two, on the actual product side, usually it takes a lot of work to get a product off the ground. And sometimes just not quitting and iterating and keep trying to make it better. But it doesn't need to be perfect. Before you try to take it to market. And then we can kind of get into other discussions about maybe how you do that. But those are the two things I usually recommend.
Oh, terrific. So, since you mentioned Chris Bryan, he pointed out to me once that if a company just survives for 5 years, its odds of success go through the roof, like much higher. So what are some of the strategies? Like what should you be thinking early on in a business?
Everyone likes to talk about product market fit. And I think that's really difficult sometimes with physical products. Typically, you're dealing with a need that you think and it's really like I talked about before. It's harder to get to a prototype where people can experience it, and you can iterate on that physical prototype. Usually costs a lot more, and if you're a student,
Yeah.
you may not have those resources to do that. And so, when you're going out and trying to start up a company early on, you're really trying to figure out as much as you can before you commit to kind of large sums of money in the manufacturing and other realms. I mean, these days it's easier to get a physical prototype than it was, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, but it's still usually a major time and resource commitment to get something that you can go test with people.
Yeah, one way we've tried to bridge that in tech transfer is we have some students creating prototypes now, and Bennett Morton's in our office works with them. And so in some cases, we hand people a physical prototype of the technology when we license it. So hopefully it gives them a little bit of a head start. But I see from them working on the prototypes, it is difficult. What makes it so hard?
It's just really hard to bring a physical product to market, and it just takes a lot longer. Usually when you go into customer feedback with a physical product, unless you've kind of nailed it on the first try, which let's be honest, it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
You're usually looking at a lot of feedback and quite possibly a lot of changes. And so if you can get that feedback early on, that's great. But that usually drives changes in your product. I would say the other thing is I work with companies that are kind of, maybe they're off the ground. Maybe they're kind of at that $1 million of revenue or something. A lot of times companies like that may stall out because they've gotten really good at maybe selling something on Amazon alone or selling something D2C, but they really haven't been able to kind of transfer that into what I would call just normal brick and mortar stores to really grow their product line.
Okay. And some people might do that intentionally as like a lifestyle business, right? But most people probably would like to expand beyond that.
Most people I talk to, they're trying to, right? But it's difficult. It's a difficult hurdle to get through.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, and we mentioned you have a few different roles. So Canyon 14 Partners, is that an entity that invests in other companies, or what does Canyon 14 do?
We we usually don't work with anyone who we're not taking an equity stake in.
Okay.
And then we're typically helping with, again, product strategy, distribution strategy, sometimes helping out with design, and to be honest, most of the time it's simplification of what people have. Yeah. Most of the companies I run into, the products are really great, but maybe they have too many iterations. A lot of times you'll have too many SKUs for someone to really grow beyond the kind of where they are today. They've done really well on the product side, but they really need to focus if they want to grow. Yeah.
Have you seen those pictures of like the SpaceX Raptor engines, the first version to the present one? It just gets massively simpler. Right. So interesting. Well, great. So you're teaching students strategy here at BYU, and I think at UVU also. Well, you've mentioned a couple lessons, but what are the most important things student entrepreneurs should learn?
Again, finance and not quitting and just starting. I get a lot of students that have a lot of ideas, and even if you can't necessarily start on that particular idea because it's maybe not cost effective as a student to do that, start on something. Yeah. Get something going so that you can get sort of the organizational and managerial things under your belt of managing a business, because that's what you're going to do. It's not just the product. I wish it was just the product itself and kind of showcasing the product and selling the product, but that's usually a very small part of the business to be successful.
So you came from an engineering background, so you're a technical business person, technical entrepreneur. For people who are in that space, who are maybe engineering students here at BYU but are nervous about stepping into entrepreneurship, what would you tell them?
So I was a really bad engineer, and to be honest, my first kind of career out of engineering school was aerospace engineering, and that has really long product life cycles. I love the people, but I really had a hard time kind of grasping that industry because, again, you do a lot of work for a really long time to make something happen. And for me, I don't know if most engineers feel this way. I knew already coming out of undergrad that I wasn't going to be an engineer. And so, I tried to find opportunities that were a little bit on the fringes of some of the companies, and that's something I always tell my students. If you're going to go into a big place, like I went to Ford or Harley-Davidson, I was usually working on very cutting-edge projects, which a lot of times people in larger organizations don't want to work on those because there's kind of a perception of a risk of job security with those. But I always found that going towards those projects, or maybe a little bit more risky, a little more cutting edge, you always got a lot more opportunity. You got to work with really smart people, executives. You usually got a lot of responsibility to kind of take the project from something from a strategy all the way through an idea phase and maybe into execution versus, working on whatever the bread and butter is that organization does day in and day out. Those are typically where you're going to have less responsibility. So I always tell students, especially when you're younger in your career, and if you're an engineer, go for those projects that are a little bit more on the edge where you're going to do more than just engineering.
Okay, great. And so they are entrepreneurial because you're doing something riskier, right? But when you say that you learn more than engineering, what did you learn in those kind of roles?
So I think, again, the engineering is the product development process is such a small part of the entire business process. And so really taking a step back and saying, okay, how do we make this work from a financial standpoint and an operational standpoint? Then you start to design the product in such a way where you do have healthy margins. Because when you don't have healthy margins, it's really tough as a business to then go execute. And so you're kind of learning the, larger things around the business that help you then kind of create a business that's going to last a little bit longer.
Okay, great. So one place where you work on strategy now is with Pura. Is that how you pronounce it, Pura? And I think they have a great billboard on the freeway. Don't they say Utah's fastest growing tech company is?
So they were recently awarded Utah's fastest growing company.
Okay, yeah. And what is the whole slogan? They're an air freshener company, right?
So they're a smart tech air diffuser. Or fragrance diffuser company. Just launched 2 new products yesterday.
Okay.
Go check them out. But I specifically do pricing strategy and monetization. So looking for new businesses and things there as well.
Okay, and the product itself it's smart because it knows when it should distribute more scent, right? Is that
or you can schedule it.
Oh, okay.
I think there's 2 great things about Pura. One, the experience. You can schedule your fragrancing. You can do a lot of different things with home scenting. And then also they have a lot of great brand partners. So very cool premium brand partners that you can buy fragrance from that fit into your Pura device.
Okay, interesting. And so you work with pricing. I get questions. I got a question yesterday from an entrepreneur looking at one of our technologies, and they said, what do you think this should cost? Like, what should the price be? And I said, well, until you identify the consumer, it's really hard to say. What are some of the considerations when you're strategizing price?
I just had a pricing section today in class.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
And so you can do everything from, I've done a lot in pricing over my career. So if you have some funding, you can do things like discrete conjoint pricing analysis, which tends to be a little more expensive, but not too expensive these days. And you can really hone in on how much value people give to each feature in your product.
And are you collecting that data from surveys or from looking at other products?
It's always a survey.
Okay.
And people are responding and shopping. You're not just asking them how much would you pay. They're going in and shopping off different combinations of attributes and price for the product you're developing. And what that allows you to do is optimize on either maybe sales volume or profit, or you can optimize your features at a certain cost. And it usually helps you kind of go back to the product development team and say, hey, these features here, we should remove these, and ultimately it will give you a price that you should charge for your product as well, and a market share that you're expected to get from that. Now, if you don't have those resources or the know-how to do a conjoint analysis, there's other methodologies you can use, like Van Westendorp pricing test is pretty cheap to do. You can do it for free, and it's just a simple survey that allows you to sort of triangulate around certain price points depending on what your strategy is. And there's some pretty simple methodologies that I teach in class that any student team can go do for free. That kind of gives you some guidance on pricing.
Okay, and I'm picturing like Google Ads with A/B testing, things like this.
Nope, they're just simple surveys out to customers, and you're giving them a product description, and then sort of in a Van Westendorp survey, there's a certain way to ask questions that helps you kind of triangulate what the optimal price is for that product.
Okay.
Or at least what people are willing to pay.
Okay, great. So another company you're working with currently is Brazilian Flame. What did they do?
So they make Brazilian-style rotisserie grills. And they make an outdoor sort of larger version with skewers, just like you go to a Brazilian steakhouse. They're pretty popular these days. What their claim to fame is they're bringing that Brazilian steakhouse into your home. And they're really great machines. I love them. I'm kind of a grill snob, so I have a lot of different grills, but definitely one of my favorite ones to use. And, they make a tower grill with 5 skewers. You can put different kinds of meats and veggies on it, cook it, and then serve it. And then they make an indoor grill that's electric that you can use year round. That's a countertop that's smaller.
Yeah.
But it's a fun company.
So yeah, I've seen those on LinkedIn. I don't know if you posted or I've seen other people, but they do look great. Brazilian barbecue, very popular in a few places, definitely Utah, Texas, a few other states. Is there interest all over the place, or what's the business like?
I mean, there's pockets of interest all over the place. Believe it or not, a large population of Brazilian Americans live in New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
And so New Jersey, Florida, kind of the Sun Belt areas, but it's not, I would say it's not just, it's very culturally Brazilian because that's where it comes from. And in fact, the founders have a really great story. It was 4 Brazilian Americans that kind of got together and wanted to bring this experience home and develop this product. But, they're selling everywhere. And when I kind of joined their efforts, from Canyon 14, it was all about how do we kind of take them to the next level, because they're not in brick and mortar retail net right now.
Okay.
And so I've done that before in the past. So how do we take these guys from kind of where they're selling on Amazon today and, kind of scale their business into more brick and mortar areas?
Okay, so that is the strategic question you're addressing, really, right? Or one of the major questions. So how do you approach a problem like that? Do you plot out different scenarios, different paths you could take to brick and mortar, or how do you do it?
Again, looking at their profitability on kind of what they're doing for different SKUs. For them in particular, we kind of came in and really recommended a SKU reduction, because again, if you're going to go to, say, a Home Depot or a Target or something, it's hard. You can't really give them 8 or 9 choices. You really have to come down to one, and then on top of that, as I kind of talked about before, the inventory management that kind of proliferates if you have a lot of SKUs. It gets harder and harder. You're just not poised to grow when you have a lot of SKUs. And so some of it is SKU reduction. And then from a targeting aspect, who are we targeting? A lot of the early buyers were, kind of Brazilian Americans, people who understood this type of barbecue. But, a lot of the group that really loves the products are like tailgaters, anybody who just likes to grill outside. It's kind of another, I say it's like if you had a smoker and a normal grill. Maybe you bought a Oni pizza oven. Well, the next thing you need out there is a Brazilian flame.
That makes a lot of sense. So, reducing SKUs, it feels like Chef Ramsay. Every restaurant you go to, you need to tell them to simplify, right?
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah. Well, and I've even thought, I'd appreciate your feedback on this. So Tech Transfer, on our website, we list hundreds of technologies that are available for license. And I have thought maybe that's overwhelming. Maybe we should just have 3 available at a time or something.
You're trying to kind of go out. You have to service those technology, all of them.
Yes,
though,
that's
right?
true.
You can't just service some of them. So I like the idea of highlighting, and I think you're already doing this. You guys highlight key ones.
Yes.
They're very available, and I've seen videos and things that you guys have done on that. You're doing a great job. So I think just highlighting those, and then there are people out there that probably want to do the deep dive into certain types of technology, and just making that available. But maybe you just don't have to spend as much time sort of showcasing that.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that makes a lot of sense. So on our YouTube channel, mostly engineering devices, like things that people could do, companies like you're talking about, we tend to showcase. And then on the website, I do think there are serial entrepreneurs who maybe want to flip through 200 technologies or whatever it is.
So I've been on there before, just kind of going through the technologies, looking at opportunities. And I like both of them. I like, if you're going to sit down and watch a YouTube video on a certain technology, that helps you understand it more. Versus you just want to kind of see what's available and browse a little bit. That opportunity is there as well. Okay.
Well, appreciate it. So in the industry, in we'll say product-based companies, what trends do you see, or how has the market changed?
So, at Harley-Davidson, and even in some of the companies I'm working with now, design and aesthetics is very important. And so what I'm seeing a lot now is, AI allows you to produce a product prototype extremely fast, at least an image of one, right? And in some cases, they're getting to like even designing them and things in CAD programs with AI. But what I've found is that only gets you so far. And so that allows you to iterate sort of on the idea a lot faster and ideate. But what it doesn't do, at least in my experience, is really get you down to a design that's manufacturable or that's going to win with a customer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, while I think it's been helping on the front end, people ideate towards a better kind of mousetrap,
Yeah.
especially from a maybe industrial design standpoint. At the end of the day, I feel like those folks who do that work in person are very valuable,
Yeah.
especially before you go into a phase where you're testing.
Yeah. For a very early prototype, if you're an entrepreneur, you just have this idea, it does seem like you could use AI tools to create a design in a few hours and then 3D print it this evening. So maybe early end prototyping could be
It
very
helps you
rapid, right?
ideate, helps you
Yeah.
sort of find something that looks interesting.
Yeah.
But I really feel like to take it to the next step to make it real. A lot of people think you can get there with AI. I don't see it there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't say it's not going to happen.
What if you're an entrepreneur and you have this idea, maybe you can make some rough prototypes, but they're definitely not market worthy, and you don't have that prototyping skill. How do you find the right person, or where can you go to get prototyping done?
Well, there's a lot of resources at universities.
Yeah.
I know BYU included, Utah State and UVU and University of Utah. A lot of them will have like maker labs.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times there'll be people in there, even if you don't know how to make something, somebody else will. You can network in those. There's a lot of opportunities to meet people who maybe they don't want to do the side of the business that you're doing. Maybe they're really good makers. And you can partner up with them and get your product at least to a point where you can start testing it or, start giving a prototype out to stores or things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, it is interesting. So at BYU or any university probably, you wish you could get all the engineering and business students together somehow. And there are at BYU, because of the way the MBA program works, when I was in the MBA program too, we had students like you who would graduate in engineering and then they're doing an MBA. So is that a trend, or is that something you've seen much of?
I've been out of the university for so long.
Okay.
I've just barely kind of come back in and started doing it. So I probably can't answer that question. But I definitely see a lot of people, even without engineering degrees, getting products off the ground. And they're doing that by, partnering with, people who just know how to make things
Mm-hmm.
versus an engineer. You may not need a full-blown engineer to make a prototype.
Okay. In the course of working with these various products, various strategies in different companies, what mistakes have you seen or possibly made, and what can we learn from those?
Again, I see a lot of product-led companies love their products a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the times they get a little bit undisciplined with just SKU proliferation,
Mm-hmm.
or a lot of times they won't iterate fast enough because as a product designer, sometimes you think you're the expert.
Yeah.
And not that customers should say everything you should do in a product, but a lot of times I've seen people just they kind of stall their own growth by doing too many products.
Okay.
And so I've made that mistake in the past. There's been some product launches that I've done where maybe we've launched 6 products within 12 months, and maybe we should have only done, one or 2.
And what drives that? Why do companies make that mistake?
I think because they can make those,
Yeah.
and just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think a good example is Pura. I mean, Pura is 10 years old now, and until last year, they had one SKU
All right.
from a device perspective. And so they're one of the fastest growing companies in Utah. They're very successful, great team, really great culture. They did that all on very disciplined one SKU.
Right. So for 9 years, they're just iterating through versions of the one product.
Correct.
Okay. Wow, that's great. And so now what leads a decision to move away from that for them or a company that's established? Are they just like slowly moving a different direction, or?
I mean, I think what's great about Pura is they have great product market fit. And so they really honed in on, what they do really well. Now, once they've done that, they created, a wall diffuser that diffuses a certain area. And now just yesterday, they launched two new products, one for your car and the other one for larger spaces in your home. So they're just taking their same know-how, what they're really good at, and just helping you apply it to your whole home now in your car.
Yeah. And we don't need to know their future strategy, but it does make sense that once you feel like you're very rooted 9 years into a space, that maybe move into some adjacent areas?
I just think it's a really good example of a company that a lot of companies, if they were that successful, would have just probably, started making a lot of different products, and they stayed very disciplined. And I think, their leadership team has been rewarded for that.
Okay, great. So you personally study engineering, study business, and then you've done a bunch of entrepreneurial things, worked with some major companies. Now you're back at the university. What should change about entrepreneurial education, or how do we teach people to be entrepreneurs, or should we?
I think a lot. When I was going through undergrad, it was all about kind of getting a mentor and going through maybe a mentorship program or an incubator. There was a lot of incubators at the time. And I really do believe in kind of this transition from maybe an incubator to more of the startup studio model, where, maybe it's not a group of students creating one thing. Maybe it's a group of students creating a few different things, and maybe one of those comes out and is successful. And I really do believe the studio model has kind of helped bring technology and bring businesses to the forefront with less cost versus the kind of traditional venture and seed funding and incubator model. Now, how does that work in a university? I don't know. I think that's kind of tricky because typically startup studios, they'll have a team around, creating a certain number of businesses. And so how do you do that with a transitory, student population and have them get involved? I don't know if I have the answer for that, but I think this transition away from just mentoring and having someone create maybe an app in an incubator, maybe they're creating more things, and maybe they're drawing out the entire business while they're in school.
Yeah, and so a couple of things we've done in tech transfer, we're trying to connect better with venture studios. And I have a list of 500 venture studios in the U.S. They've popped up. They've grown a lot. And I know of about 40 that will consider a raw idea and then completely build a company around it, even finding their own CEO and everything. So that's good for us. For the students, I think Sandbox through the Rollins Center and the business school is probably the best thing we have that fits those criteria right now, right?
Yeah, I haven't been involved with that, but I've just kind of seen things on it. Any opportunity where a student has help and resources to take something from idea, especially on an app or the software side, from an idea to execution, I mean that's what they need.
Okay.
I wish a lot of this stuff would have been here when I was here.
Yeah.
It was great when I was here, but it certainly wasn't as good as it is today.
Yeah. Perfect. So if a student were to tell you, look, I want to be an entrepreneur, and I could create a product, and that's appealing and everything, but it's so much faster to create an app, so I'm doing that. What would you tell them? What's the argument for doing a physical product instead?
Usually with a physical product, you can create a little bit more of a moat around your company versus an app. A lot of times with apps and software in general, somebody can come and make something similar or go after your market, or if they're specifically strong at sales, maybe an app's a better way to go. Whereas in the product space, you're really trying to make something unique. Maybe it's a little bit more protectable in some cases, and typically they're harder to scale. But a lot of times they just resonate more with people, and they're able to stick around longer if you can kind of cross the chasm of getting off the ground, which is pretty hard to do.
Okay, that makes sense. So final strategy question is, so we're trying to launch more student startups out of tech transfer, and we do a bunch each year. What would make licensing a technology from the university and launching a company more appealing to a student team? Like strategically, what's the irresistible offer we could make?
Yeah, I mean, having tried it and done it, I can say a lot of technologies at tech transfer, I don't say this in a rude way, they're marketed to, hey, you can take this out and make it happen. And usually the effort to do that is like 20 times more than you think it might be, right? Yeah. And in general, it's usually more than you think it is. But I think in tech transfer specifically, it's that way. And the other thing that I struggled with is a lot of times students don't have a lot of execution experience.
Right.
And so, there's just not a lot of traction behind a student with a tech transfer idea versus a student who makes something on their own and kind
Yeah.
of builds it up on their own. So I feel like the tech transfer office or the university in general, just helping them build kind of build avenues for them to sort of start that execution phase. I know you probably don't do this because you guys are probably already doing this, but and you already mentioned one thing, but instead of just handing it off, maybe you're handing it off with a prototype. Maybe you're handing it off with a prototype and a certain kind of option to go into a program that helps you the first 9 months of the business.
Yeah.
For a student especially, that's going to really help them versus trying to do it on their own. It's very difficult.
Yeah, we are working towards a competition model where it's more like a multi-month process of going through funding opportunities and other things. And ultimately, we'd like to be able to hand students a startup in a box. Like, here's the technology, hopefully with a prototype or something very close to market, and here are the steps we think you should take, right?
I think the other thing, and I know you guys do this a lot too, is get the original kind of leading professor highly involved.
Right.
I've seen some tech transfer companies not do that, and usually they can't get off the ground as fast. And to be honest, the professor's perspective usually is very good,
Right.
especially on the product side. I mean, maybe it's not ready straight to go to market, but that's invaluable sort of knowledge that you want to keep in the company. And so I always advise tech transfer students, hey, make sure you do a great deal to keep the professor involved.
Yep.
Because it's critical usually to the success of the company.
Absolutely agree. Well, great. Well, Jason, we're out of time, but thanks so much for taking time to talk strategy and products with us today. You're teaching courses at BYU and UVU. People can find you on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else they should look?
No, LinkedIn's a good spot for it. So
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Okay, great to have you. Thanks.
All right, bye.